Today I'm going to talk to you about creating license terms for B2B SaaS. Hey guys, my name is Ulrik and I'm a pricing consultant. I've done more than 150 projects for B2B SaaS and I'm probably one of the highest paid consultants in the world. And this is something obviously that I talk to my clients about a lot. And I have a very simple little framework that I want to show you that helps you to walk through the 4 steps in designing a license model that I usually think about. So first, let me be clear what I mean about a license model. So what I mean about it is not sort of the, should I charge per user or should I charge usage based or should I have a flat fee and annual and none of that. So what I'm talking about is that when you have decided all of that and you say, okay, so we're charging per user and this is the packaging and whatever, how do I actually decide how many users I have? What happens if the customer wants more users during the year, or what if they want less? And what happens after a year once we need to decide how many users they want in year 2? So it's that process that we're going to dig into here. I have this very simple little Excel sheet that I actually created. This is like version, 3 or 5 or something. I created version 1 in a meeting with a client about a year ago. And so it has these sort of 4 sections that I want to walk you through. One is sort of the initial license, which means like the initial volume of X being users or whatever it is that I'm buying. Could also be API calls or like store locations or whatever it is that your software does and you have as a pricing metric. How do we determine the volume on that initial number? And then we're going to say, well, how do we then upgrade it? Like, so if I want more volume during the year, what happens if I want to downgrade this away? If I want less volume during the year, and how do we determine volume in year 2 at renewal? So as you see here, I have a few options. So it's almost like a multiple choice that I've set up, and then I've sort of scored them on operation, initial sale, and cash flow, and also on the expansion. So at least some of them. So they have more or less the same classification here. So you have 4 options more or less when setting the initial license. So if customers, I want to buy the solution, that's great. Now we just need to determine how many users I actually need. You can say, okay, so we have a few versions here. Either we just start from 0. You say, we don't need to determine a number of users. You just have none. And then whenever you want to have them, essentially that is now handled in the upgrade function. So we'll just move the question, right? So, but you start from 0. From an operational standpoint, that is easy, meaning that, I don't have to, I can automate that. I can just that is just the point of the contract. We don't need to argue it. I can set it up automatically to just start every customer at 0 and that's it, right? So this is actually how a lot of different usage-based models work, right? So this is you don't have any users from the beginning. It's a usage model. So you start from 0 and then you go. The initial sale is usually relatively easy, meaning that people are sure, that sounds low risk. I'll just go, right? So the only thing can be if you have weirdness in how discounts are applied later that would have made it more profitable or let's say less costly for the customer to start with a higher volume, then they can have some friction around that. But if assuming that that's not the case here, usually customers are going to accept that you're not locking them into any volume to begin with. Cash flow is poor, right? So if you charge for 100 users up front for a year, you're going to get the cash now. If you charge for 0 users and just let them grow, they are going to give you the cash later, right? So cash flow is poor. Okay, so option 2 here is you negotiate it with the customer. Say, well, how many do you need? And we say, well, we don't need a lot. And you say, well, you need quite a bit. You hash out a number. That is a manual operational task to negotiate. So that costs you money just to do. The initial sale is, let's say, medium difficult, meaning that customers will accept that that's how it's done. So they're not going to push you back on it, but they're going to negotiate. And the cash flow is medium, right? So you can usually land on a relatively good number. Customer will try to be conservative. You'll try to be optimistic. You can also let the customer choose. You say, I don't care. I'm not going to spend time negotiating with you. So you just let me know, right? And then that usually is on the basis of some sort of a discount framework where you say, hey, 1 to 10 users is priced X. And if you take from 11 to 100 users, that is, you get a 10% discount, and above 100, you get a 20% discount. But you need to tell me now, right? So you need to commit to a volume up front, and then, the prices will reflect that and so forth. Or you can just, depends a little bit on how your discounts work. Usually you could automate this, but it tends to be a manual process because especially if there are some discounts, it needs some explaining and, the customer needs to sort of understand the complexity. They don't want to regret what they're doing and so forth. But it is a relatively easy sale. They're going to accept it. They're not going to be any pushback. per se. Usually the cash flow is pretty poor, like the customer is gonna, lowball it before they go in. The fourth option is that you estimate the volume based on some sort of framework or data, right? So you're saying, okay, so, we are going to say that you need 1 user per 100 employees, and you have 10,000 employees, so you need 100 users, something like that, right? Or you have a benchmark, or you do something and you say, that is it, right? Or if you're selling coffee machines for offices, you're going to say, well, how many employees do you have, and how many floors do you have, and how many white collar versus blue collar workers do you have, whatever the algorithm is, and then you say, oh, then you need like 6 coffee machines and 427.2 pods a day, whatever the number is, because that's what the algorithm says. So that's your initial volume. So you can actually automate that depending a little bit on what the sales situation is here. But so it's either automatic or manual. Initial sale can be harder, a little bit depending on what it is. But this is sort of usually where it gets hard if you don't have a knockdown algorithm. So, but this is on the quality of your framework and data. If the customer accepts this and it's clear, it's just a medium, but it can be hard, especially if they feel that you're taking them for a ride. But cash flow can be pretty great because you actually usually get to right size the customer from the initial get-go. Like they actually get the volume they need. Okay, so you decide on initial volume, then the customer gets going, and then you have the upgrade path. So you have like instant paywall, which means they run out of users, and then you're saying, you cannot create another user, you need to pay. Or you have delayed paywall, which means that they run out of users, and then you let them create a few more, and then at some point, once they're, let's say, 20% above the initial license, you call them and say, hey, you're using it way more than we agreed, we need to do something. And in each of these, you have like 3 scenarios. One is the +1 user, the additional user, is priced prohibitively. Like it's an overage price, so it's priced higher, right? So you buy 10 users, that's a good price. And then if you need 11, that 11th one is really expensive, which is trying to force you as the first step to actually, get more users from the beginning, right? So these things, of course, will be presented in one sales conversation with the customer, and they will consider it as a whole, so they affect each other. Or you can just say, whatever price you got, like if you go to 50 users, you unlock a certain discount, and if you need 51, that's that same price. So you're not going to be penalized for it. Or the last scenario is whatever level you choose, 50 users, if you go above that, and we normally would have given you a discount on this new higher volume, you also get it now, right? So unlock discounts on new volume means that regardless of what you chose at the beginning, I'm not going to penalize you for making a wrong decision. I'm just going to unlock all the discounts. So these 3 scenarios psychologically are quite different, right? So instant paywall, all of them can be automated, by the way. All of them can be, shouldn't require your hands-on manual labor in the process. That said, the first 2 here, higher prices and same prices, they can have a medium sales impact because they are like, customer now needs to consider things and they can make a wrong decision. So sales cycle drag, they need to understand and so forth. So there is actually the possibility for a wrong decision, so they will take more time. If they are penalized for expanding, they will expand less. If they are not penalized but just have to pay the same, they will just expand the same. And expansion here could be a slightly better, it could even be, but it's not as great as essentially this, which is free once I go above the volume. So I've just put it a medium here. For the first 2, cash flow is great. For this one, cash flow is poor, because usually this means that they will actually lowball the initial amount. Like they will go in with less volume, because if they unlock discounts on new volume, like why do I need to pay a lot up front? I'll just go with the fewest amount of users, and then I'll just expand the heck out of it. Delayed paywall works the same way, except that cash flow is a little bit less good and sales are a little bit better and expansion is a lot better. And then the final one is one thing I actually use quite a bit, which is just free expansion. Like whatever you have in the volume, like buy 50 users, you can just put on as many users as you want. Like 10,000 users, sure, go ahead. I'm not going to charge you for it that year. Free expansion. Year 2, when it comes up to renewal, then we'll talk, right? Then we'll need to sort of figure out, because obviously you had a lot of value out of the solution, but in year 1, knock yourself out. That usually creates a great expansion rate. It's super easy to sell. It can be automated and so forth. Cash flow, pretty poor, right? So because depending a little bit on how your initial, so this one, if you have like based on a framework data, and then you can just do free expansion, it sort of evens out, but that's usually how it goes. Then you have the downgrades, which is how do I actually sort of reduce the volume once I have it. And I think the most normal one is for a license to just have no downgrades. Like you'll downgrade next year in the renewal. And most would accept that. There can be a little bit of pushback, especially if you're trying to set them up for a high volume, especially if the customer has a lot of seasonal variation or other variation that is out of their control, they will want to argue this. So you can also do a negotiated one, which is, for all intents and purposes, the worst option that you have because it's manual. It sets up a lot of friction in the account. Cash flow is usually poor. You don't have a lot of visibility and predictability in your cash flow and so forth. You can also this is essentially a credit system. So you can just roll over to next period in full or partial, which means, okay, you bought 100 users, you're only using 80. I'm just going to give you the extra 20 you didn't use for like whatever the next period for free, right? So this can make it easier also to do high initial volumes, which why cash flow is great. Expansion can be pretty easy. Initial sale is easy and so forth. So essentially credit systems work great. They can be a little bit more complex to explain, but that's about it. Or you can of course like say, hey, if you want downgrade, you just downgrade it. We send you the cash back. This is almost not ARR or whatever it is, but for users-based volumes with high upfront commits, you can do something like this. And then the cash flow can be pretty poor and your CFO is going to hate you, but it is an option. So it's there. At renewals, whenever you are going to determine the year 2 license, you have, let's say, the buckets here are probably what I would say manual, which is like customer just chooses just all over again. You negotiate it all over again, or you say by some sort of framework, a little bit like we had in the beginning, we're now going to project your usage. That usually in year 2 is going to be manual, even though it could be automatic. But it usually tends to be a negotiation process, why I have it as manual here. So those are great. Projected users tends to have good expansion, good cash flow and so forth, because your framework is going to favor you. And then you have some automatic ones. The first one is not advisable, which is just like you don't ever change it. So just whatever. The 100 users they had in year 1 is also what they have in year 5. And usually it would, which is essentially just like free expansion, you're not going to monetize it. You like set it and forget it and you just go spend your time on something else, which is usually what we see in like a little bit immature operations, is that the initial license can sometimes be totally divorced from reality, right? They bought whatever X number of licenses at the beginning and now they have whatever Y, and X and Y are nowhere near close to each other. But it happens. You can also restart it from 0, which is like almost like a users-based pricing model all over again, and can be great. And then you can do what I call transposed pricing, which is that the volume that you had in year 1 is becoming your license for year 2, right? So you say, hey, let's say that we did a model where we said, I'm going to, negotiate that you start with 10 users, and then I'm going to give you free expansion all the way through, right? So you just go to whatever, 50 users, right? There's no downgrades. So that's part of what I get when I do this. And then once we hit the threshold to year 2, we're going to say, hey, you now have 50 users, right? And that's what you used in the last year. So year 2, I'm going to charge you upfront for 50 users for the next period. And then if you in year 2 go to 300 users, that's fine, free expansion. But then in year 3, I'm going to upgrade you to 300. That's how that works. And then you can have different versions of that, such as, if you have 50 users, I'm only going to upgrade you to, let's say, 40, right? So I'm not going to take you the full amount, and then I'm going to allow you to sort of, let's say, continue to grow, especially if you have seasonal variation and so forth, that can make sense. Or you can do sort of average of last 12 months if the time period is a little bit off. Like let's say you onboard people in May and then you renew them in January. So less than 12 months later, then, you can have a case where that needs to happen. But usually these sort of previous period actual usage things, or with, let's say, a buffer where you downgrade a little bit, can work out pretty well. So if you take it all together, it usually gives a pretty good framework here. So I hope it makes sense to you. I hope it gives you a little bit of inspiration of how to structure yours. All right, thanks.